Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. Today we're taking a little bit of a look at the motherboard that ASRock threw everything and the kitchen sink at. It's the ASRock Z690 Aqua Gear Seekers Edition. What we're going to do is what we usually do is we're going to take a look at everything on the board, what comes in the box, and see what makes this motherboard tick. However, as usual with our motherboard content, this video is not a review. So let's get into it. Alright ladies and gents, here it is, the ASRock Z690 Aqua. Let's pop this very nice box open so we can take a bit of a look at what's inside. Ooh, what's this? A letter that says Gear Seekers on it? What's inside? Alright, let's take a bit of a look at this. It looks like there's a credit card. Let's hope there's some money in here for us. Nah, that's not going to happen. Okay, dear customer, thank you for your purchase of the ASRock Z690 Aqua motherboard. We didn't purchase this, ASRock sent it through. You can pause this if you want to read it, but basically it says thanks for purchasing. But let's get the motherboard out of the way so we can take a bit of a look at all the things that come in the box. First up, we've got some SATA or SATA cables for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning rust drives. People don't understand that spinning rust is a joke and it just means a hard disk. Anyway, there's a bunch of thermal pads and some thermal paste and some spare screws for the monoblock on this board. There's also a little guide as to the best way to install this as well in that little transparent bit of plastic in there as well. Let's open up flap number 2. We've got this circular plastic device which really shouldn't exist with a motherboard like this. Give us a USB stick, guys. Come on. What are you doing? Next up, we've got the quick installation guide, which is kind of like a Harry Potter novel, but to be fair, this is in every language you can imagine, so that's why it's so thick. But it basically just shows you what everything is and where everything is on the board. And there's also this software setup guide, which is actually pretty handy because it shows you how to configure quite a few BIOS options. Now, not all motherboards include something like this, so this is a nice to have. All right, what's underneath that bottom flap? We've got 3 M.2 screws for the 3 M.2 slots that are on this board. There's also the Wi-Fi antenna for the built-in Wi-Fi 6E that's on this motherboard. This board has a lot of connectivity, which we're going to look at in just a moment. And the last flap, this is an interesting one. This has a digital pressure tester, so when you're building your loop, you can test to see if it holds its pressure over an amount of time. I have talked about this quite a bit in videos, but these are very handy for loops, so you don't have to just guess when you're filling them up. But basically it comes with this little hose. It's got a standard G1/4 threaded fitting on it to connect up to your loop, and then you can use it to pressure test. There's also an included battery in this. If you pop off the back panel, you need to slide that bit of plastic out to make contact so the battery works. But let's take a bit of a closer look at the Z690 Aqua from ASRock, and it's the Gear Seekers edition because it says Gear Seekers on it. First up, there's the front panel audio header. There's a 4-pin 12-volt analog RGB header, a 3-pin 5-volt digital RGB header. There's 2 PWM fan headers. There's a TPM header, which you do not need to use. It is integrated into the CPU. There's 2 USB 2.0 headers, basically used for RGB controllers these days. There's also a postcode LED screen, a reset button, a power button, and all the connectors for your front panel lighting and switches. There's 2 more PWM fan connectors. There's a safe boot and a boot retry button as well if you're doing some LN2 overclocking. There's also 8 SATA or SATA ports for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning rust drives. There's 2 USB 3.2 headers. One is a normal angle, one is right angle, which is actually quite nice. There's 2 USB Type-C front panel headers, 2 more PWM fan connectors, the 24-pin power connector to send juice to your brand new Z690 Aqua, and 2 more 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB headers. Above the RAM slots, there are also 2 more PWM fan connectors. On the top left of the board, there's 2 8-pin EPS power connectors to send juice to your 12th gen Intel CPU. For PCIe connectivity, the top slot, which is the one to the left, is a PCIe Gen 5x16 slot. Then you've got a PCIe Gen 3x1 slot. There's a PCIe Gen 4x8 slot and a PCIe Gen 3x4 slot right at the bottom. This board features Intel's Z690 chipset, and the good thing about this board is, and I'm going to say it again, look at that, it says Gear Seekers on it. If it says Gear Seekers on it, I'm gonna do a video about it, let's be honest. Right, there's also this monoblock, which I'm guessing is made by Bits Power. It is quite a solid monoblock, and it doesn't have any lighting inside of it, but it does cover the VRM and the CPU layout. There's also this little OLED screen. They did this on the Z490 Aqua as well, and it has a bunch of readouts for voltages and temperatures, and you can actually configure this in the BIOS without installing an operating system. If we flip the board over, you can see that the Z690 Aqua actually has a full cover backplate. Now this isn't for just aesthetic things. There's also some thermal pads on the back here to help with dissipating heat across the whole backside of the motherboard. And you can see there's the backplate for the monoblock around the CPU socket as well. But let's take off that backplate. I'm going to take off the monoblock, and we're going to show you what is underneath all of that, because, you know, if I didn't, then people would be upset. So let's pull off that very solid monoblock to reveal what is underneath all of it. So this board features Intel's LGA 1700 socket, which supports Intel's 12th gen CPUs. Whether or not this board will support future Intel CPUs, we don't know yet. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm going to say yes at this point in time, because Intel usually does 2 generations on the same socket. The VRM layout here is a bit of an interesting one. It features a 20-phase direct VRM with 105 amp power stages. So a very, very solid VRM layout. And just taking a look at those other phases from another angle, just to give you a bit of an idea of how much power delivery there is. If we flip over that monoblock, you can see that there are thermal pads that make contact with the entire VRM layout, and it has pre-installed thermal pads, which I wasn't sure that it had because it has spares in the box. And this board supports up to 128 gigs of DDR5 memory, up to 6400 mega transfers. All right, let's pull the heat sinks off the M.2 slot so we can take a little bit of a look at the storage layout here. Look how reflective those heat sinks are. They're quite literally mirrors. Okay, so every M.2 slot on this board is PCIe Gen 4. There are 3 in total. There are 2 that are in line with the PCIe slots on the board, which is pretty normal for every single motherboard. But what makes this different is there's an M.2 slot in line with the RAM slots. The reason why they've done this is this board is extended ATX, so there's a little bit more space on the PCB, so it kind of makes sense. I think why they've done this is because on the previous Aqua boards, if you use the top M.2 slots where that OLED screen is now, it would actually disable the 10 gigabit networking. So this hands it back off to the chipset, so there's no problems with that whatsoever. For rear I/O, we've got a BIOS flashback button, a clear CMOS button, 2 antenna connectors for the built-in Wi-Fi 6E, an HDMI 2.1 connector if you're using that integrated graphics. There's also 7.1 digital surround sound with optical and SPDIF output, a bunch of USB Type A ports. There's also 10 gigabit networking on here, 2.5 gigabit networking. There's also 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports and 2 DisplayPort inputs, so you can use that Thunderbolt 4 for display pass-through. And lastly, as with most boards, it's got an integrated I/O shield. Ladies and gents, hope you enjoyed this first look and overview of the ASRock Z690 Aqua Gear Seekers Edition. I'm just saying Gear Seekers Edition because it's got Gear Seekers written on the board. How cool is that? Now, there is one kind of big issue I have with this board, and it's kind of what ASRock does when they do these Aqua boards, and they limit the numbers they can make, and I get why they do it because the market for it is going to be quite small. So for the Z690 Aqua, they're only doing 500 boards in total for the whole production run. They did something similar with the X570 Aqua where they did 999. But I think the Gear Seekers one and a bunch of the other YouTubers out there and content creators and other outlets that have got boards are not inside that production run, if that makes sense. So there's still 500 to buy, but I don't think you're gonna be seeing these boards anywhere at any store because there's only 500 on the whole planet. And ASRock does this to make it seem like it's an exclusive thing, and it kind of is, because if I'm being honest, ASRock's Z690 offerings have been kind of lackluster in the feature department, and I feel like they kind of got everything through every feature at the Aqua, and for the rest of the boards are like, yeah, that'll do. We're obviously going to be doing a build with it and testing and doing all that stuff later, because I think that this is an interesting enough board to do that with. In saying that, if you're interested in getting your hands on one of the Z690 Aquas, if you happen to come across one of 500 of these, you're looking at around $1,400 US for the privilege. Now, I'm not even going to quote the Australian price because chances are this and a couple other people's will be the only ones in Australia at all. I don't see this being available for sale anywhere. I guess that's kind of the point of doing a limited run board, is to make you feel like it's an exclusive club, which you kind of are in. But in terms of the price for all these high-end Z690 boards from ASRock, Gigabyte, Asus, MSI, all of them, they're just far too expensive for what you're actually getting. So I don't think they're worth it. I'm gonna be absolutely honest. But this says Gear Seekers on it. So if it says Gear Seekers on it, I'm definitely gonna be using it for something. And like I said, the feature set of this board is quite overkill, but if you compare it to some other boards that have monoblocks pre-installed on them, I think this one is probably the best value. And that's a stupid term to use for this, because $1,400 US for any motherboard is ridiculous. Especially when you consider that this is for a very niche part of the market. But regardless, I still think it's pretty cool that boards like this exist. Anyways, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We upload all of the time. And if you like the video, smash that like button. If you like the music you heard here, we make all the music. It's available by clicking that join button, going over to Patreon or on Floatplane, and get early access on Floatplane as well. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek. And yeah, this board is definitely not for everyone. Also, while I've got you here, I wanted to talk about this because we often get comments like this about our motherboard overviews, like 2 years in the future, where people are like, oh, you didn't say that this board supported PCIe Gen 4 or some feature that wasn't available at the time of launch because the next generation of chip came out that supported it. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell the future. So yeah, thanks for watching.